Karen ripped my daughter's medication box off my porch, screaming it violated her precious no visible packages rule. "This is a gated community, not a hospital," she snapped, tossing the insulin cooler into her golf cart. I begged her to understand my daughter's seizures couldn't wait for her power trip. She just smiled. "My name is Elena Cross, single mother to 8-year-old Mia, who has epilepsy requiring refrigerated emergency medication daily. We moved into Willow Creek Estates 2 years ago, drawn by the quiet streets and top-rated elementary school." Diane Whitfield ruled the HOA board like a tiny kingdom, obsessed with lawn heights and mailbox paint colors. Neighbors whispered about her fines, her petty citations, her habit of photographing driveways before sunrise. I kept my head down, paid dues on time, and hoped Diane would never notice our modest townhouse. Mia's pharmacy shipped her seizure rescue medication in insulated coolers, delivered weekly to our front step. I never imagined a cardboard box could become the center of a war I never asked for. One Tuesday, Diane spotted the cooler on my porch and declared it unsightly clutter, violating aesthetic guidelines. I explained calmly it was medical equipment, refrigerated, time-sensitive, impossible to hide inside within minutes. "Rules are rules," she said, snapping a photo for her infamous violation binder everyone dreaded receiving. The next day, a citation appeared taped to my door, fining me $50 for porch clutter. I laughed it off, paid the fine, and assumed Diane's tantrum had finally run its course. It hadn't. Diane called an emergency board meeting to draft a new rule banning porch deliveries entirely. She stood at the podium, insisting medical items could be stored in designated bins by the clubhouse. I raised my hand and explained the bins sat a quarter-mile from my house, unrefrigerated, exposed. Diane rolled her eyes, muttering that some people always needed special treatment for their problems. The board, intimidated by her tenure, passed the rule unanimously without a single follow-up question. The following week, my cooler disappeared from the porch entirely, replaced by another citation notice. I called the HOA office frantically, my hands shaking. Mia's next dose due within the hour. Property was removed per new bylaws, the assistant read flatly, refusing to say where it went. I drove straight to Diane's house, pounding on her door, pleading for my daughter's medication back. She opened it slowly, arms crossed, informing me the cooler was confiscated pending compliance review. Confiscated? That's insulin for seizures, Diane. She could have a seizure within hours without it. Diane shrugged, saying rules existed for a reason, and I should have followed proper procedure. Called 911, explained the situation, and paramedics rushed a backup dose from our local pharmacy. Mia was fine that night, but the terror of almost losing her never left my chest. I filed a formal complaint against Diane, demanding the HOA return confiscated medical property immediately. The board buried my complaint in paperwork, claiming Diane's actions fell within her enforcement authority. I realized then that fighting Diane through normal channels would take months I didn't have. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Diane avoided me at the mailboxes, smug and strangely quiet. I switched pharmacies, arranged deliveries through a neighbor's garage, hoping to avoid another confrontation entirely. Mia started 3rd grade, thriving despite everything, oblivious to the war raging around her medication. I almost believed Diane had backed off, distracted by some other neighbor's unauthorized fence color. Then a letter arrived, thick and official, informing me I owed $600 in accumulated fines. Diane had backdated citations for every week the cooler sat on our porch before the ban. I appealed directly to the board, presenting Mia's doctor's note explaining the medication's life or death necessity. Diane interrupted the meeting, waving her own printed copy of the no exceptions bylaw amendment. If we bend rules for her, everyone will claim medical emergencies to dodge our standards, she argued. One board member, Mr. Patterson, quietly asked if Diane had ever actually read Mia's diagnosis paperwork. Diane snapped that paperwork was easily forged, and she wouldn't be manipulated by sob stories. The room went silent. Even her allies looked uncomfortable with how far she'd taken things. Undeterred, Diane proposed installing security cameras aimed directly at my porch to monitor compliance. I refused entry to any camera crew, citing privacy laws protecting my daughter's medical information. Diane retaliated by reporting me to animal control over our elderly dog's supposedly excessive barking. An officer arrived, found nothing wrong, and left apologizing for what he called a nuisance complaint. Neighbors began approaching me quietly, sharing their own stories of Diane's years-long pattern of harassment. One woman showed me a folder of 43 citations Diane had issued her over 18 months. Another man revealed Diane once called immigration on a family for suspicious moving truck activity. I started recording everything, every citation, every confiscation, every threatening note taped to my door. My sister, paralegal, suggested I document a timeline before Diane's behavior escalated even further. I didn't know yet how right that warning would turn out to be within days. Diane, sensing neighbors turning against her, doubled down instead of stepping back even slightly. She scheduled a special vote to expel me from the community for repeated rule violations. I sat in that meeting watching people who once smiled at me avoid my eyes entirely. The expulsion vote failed. But Diane wasn't finished. She had one more move planned. She hired a private courier to intercept Mia's medication shipments before they ever reached our porch. For 3 days, no coolers arrived. I called the pharmacy, panicking, convinced something had gone wrong. They confirmed deliveries were made, signed for by someone named D. Whitfield at our address. I confronted Diane again, and this time she didn't bother pretending she hadn't done it. "I'm protecting community standards," she said, holding the cooler behind her like a trophy of war. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, reporting theft of prescribed emergency medical supplies. An officer arrived, listened, then walked to Diane's porch and demanded she produce the cooler immediately. Diane refused, citing HOA jurisdiction, until the officer explained mail and package theft was a federal crime. She finally handed it over, hissing that I'd regret making a scene in front of everyone. That night, Mia had a seizure, mild but terrifying, triggered by a misscheduled dose. I sat in the ER hallway shaking, replaying every citation, every confiscation, every needless delay Diane caused. A nurse asked what happened, and I explained the whole absurd, infuriating story from the beginning. She looked at me and said quietly, "You should report this. What she did is criminal." The next morning, called a lawyer, ready to finally fight Diane with everything I had. What I didn't tell anyone yet was the job I'd been quietly working toward for months. I hadn't mentioned it to neighbors, kept it private, unsure if the confirmation would ever come through. That afternoon, an email arrived from the Senate Judiciary Committee, confirming my federal judgeship had been approved. I stared at the screen, done, realizing Diane had spent months harassing a soon-to-be federal judge. I didn't announce it. Instead, I quietly gathered every piece of evidence Diane had ever generated: citations, confiscation notices, the courier interception records, security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera. My lawyer confirmed intercepting prescription medication addressed to a minor violated multiple state and federal statutes. We compiled a formal complaint, not to the HOA board, but to the county prosecutor's office. Meanwhile, Diane scheduled another meeting, this time proposing to fine families with excessive medical equipment visibility. She stood at the podium, confident, unaware investigators had already begun reviewing shipment interception records quietly. I sat in the front row, calm for the first time in months, watching her perform control. "Any objections to the new policy?" Diane asked, scanning the room for dissent she expected to crush. I raised my hand slowly and asked her to explain. "On record," why she'd intercepted federal mail. Her smile faltered. "That's not federal mail. That's a package," she stammered, suddenly less certain. I informed the room that prescription shipments through licensed pharmacies fall under federal mail protections. Diane's face drained of color as murmurs spread through the audience, board members exchanging worried glances. "You have no idea who you've been harassing," I said, standing, my voice finally steady and sharp. Diane laughed nervously, insisting I was just some tired mom trying to dodge community responsibility. I placed a folder on the podium, shipment logs, citations, courier records, all time-stamped and notarized. "I was confirmed as a federal judge yesterday," I said, and the entire room fell utterly silent. Diane's smug expression cracked, replaced by something closer to panic, her hands gripping the podium tightly. "That doesn't change the rules," she stammered, though her voice had lost every ounce of authority. "It changes everything," my lawyer said, stepping forward with a federal investigator waiting just outside. 2 officers entered, asking Diane to step outside regarding interception of federally protected mail shipments. Neighbors gasped as Diane was escorted out, still insisting she'd only been enforcing the rules. Mr. Patterson stood, visibly shaken, admitting the board had ignored months of warning signs from residents. One by one, other victims stood, reading their own citation folders aloud into stunned silence. The immigration report, the animal control harassment, years of quiet cruelty finally spilling into the open. Diane's husband arrived, confused, asking what was happening as officers guided her toward a patrol car. Investigators later confirmed Diane had intercepted 11 other residents' medical shipments over 3 separate years. She was charged with mail theft, obstruction, and violation of federal healthcare privacy protections. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her from every position she'd ever held there. Diane pleaded guilty months later, accepting probation, community service, and a permanent ban from HOA leadership. Ironically, her own son needed accommodations for asthma medication she'd once denied another family entirely. That hypocrisy became public record, cited by prosecutors as evidence of deliberate, targeted cruelty. The community rewrote its bylaws, guaranteeing medical deliveries could never again be confiscated or intercepted. Neighbors who once stayed silent now greeted me warmly, finally unafraid to speak against injustice. Mia never missed another dose, and Willow Creek finally became the safe home we deserved. Vandy.